A crucial issue that is facing all of us that live, work, or vacation along Cape Cod Bay, the ongoing decommissioning of the Pilgrim Nuclear Power Station continues to be a controversial issue where advocates, legislators, state and federal agencies have joined together to demand transparency. I'm State Senator Sue Moran, and this is In Your Corner. Joining me today are two women who've been on the front lines with the ongoing efforts to stop Holtec International from improperly disposing potentially radioactive waste into our waterways as it continues the decommissioning of the Pilgrim Nuclear Power Station. Please welcome Diane Turco of Cape Downwinders and Mary Lambert of Pilgrim Watch. Could we please start? This has been such a long-term effort by volunteer groups that both of you have led. Can you start and just tell me how the beginnings, a couple of minutes each if you don't mind, please.
The beginnings of my activism or the beginnings on this particular issue?
A little bit of both.
I'm director of Pilgrim Watch, a public safety group looking at issues that affect the public from the Pilgrim Nuclear Power Plant, chair of the town of Duxbury's appointed Nuclear Advisory Committee, member of the National Working Group, on the board of state organizations, Clean Water, and others. And as a citizen living 6 miles across, open water from Pilgrim Station is very important personally to my family and my community. As soon as Congressman Keating found out that Holtec intended to dispose of 1.1 million gallons of radioactive and chemically contaminated waste into Cape Cod Bay, Diane and I were on the phone and getting our towns, getting other towns, getting legislators, and we're very grateful for your work, on board, and the Attorney General in particular on board, and getting the local businesses that will be clearly hurt if there is a discharge. Who's going to buy oysters if they think they're grown up in a contaminated bay?
So a public safety issue as well as an economic issue. Diane, same question.
Well, I came to Plymouth in the 1980s with a friend who was my friend, dear friend Sarah Thatcher, who was an anti-nuclear activist. And at that meeting, a young Plymouth mother, about my age too, was talking about her daughter who had leukemia and how leukemia was prevalent at the elementary school. There shouldn't be 4 children in this classroom with leukemia, she said, and we're moving to Maine to get out of here.
Wow.
That's what kicked me into gear.
Wow.
As a mom and looking at children and what's happening in Plymouth. So zoom up to now, and we see that Holtec is planning to dump, as Mary said, 1 million gallons of radioactive water. Radioactive nuclides don't belong in any public waterways, period, end of subject. There are other alternatives that Holtec could use, but because dumping in the bay is the cheapest way to go, they're looking at their pocketbook and not really paying attention to the impact it would have on the local economy, the health of the public and the marine animals. Tourism, it would all be severely damaged. So we are asking Holtec to be environmentally responsible and keep radionuclides out of our environment.
And there have been many organizations that have joined you, businesses, shellfish people, lobster folks. The last handicap meeting, the citizens group that's appointed by the governor and includes many Plymouth advocates and others, had a last meeting, I believe it was July. You sit on that board.
Right.
Talk about that last meeting, both of you, if you would.
I think the two important takeaways are as follows. First, it is illegal, against the law, federal and state laws, for Holtec to discharge contaminated water into Cape Cod Bay. that is a protected ocean sanctuary, protected by the law that says no industrial commercial waste shall be discharged. It is also protected by the EPA and state's discharge permit that says no water from the spent fuel pool or decommissioning processes should be dumped into the bay. They both say zero, and there is no way that the discharge will not have waste.
Well, Diane, I know you agree, and you've gone to the extent of actually being arrested to really try to find out what, with the lack of transparency, what is exactly going on at the plant. Can you talk a little bit about that?
About why I was arrested?
Yes.
Well, that has to do with a whole other issue, the nuclear waste that's on site. You know, we have 47 years of high-level nuclear waste that the federal government doesn't know what to do with, but recognizes it needs to be isolated from the environment for tens of thousands of years. And all of that is sitting on a hill in Plymouth, out in the open, in half-inch steel cans. So that's another huge issue that people need to be paying attention to, because there's a nuclear waste dump in Plymouth that impacts our entire state. We also know, too, what's happening over the pond is that nuclear power plants can be weapons of war. And that's a serious national security issue that is not being addressed in this country.
And
so, yeah.
One of the reasons I wanted to do this show with both of you, based upon your expertise, the length of time that you've been serious effort at advocacy, the groups of folks that you have brought together, you know, it's unusual to have this level of commitment, and yet, as we are discussing today, it's absolutely foundational to partner with legislators, with our health organizations. I just finished a meeting a few days ago with the legislative delegations from both Plymouth side of the canal and also the Cape side of the canal. We had, as we had before, the state agencies, DPH, they have agreed, Jack Priest in fact, to actually monitor the sampling that is going to be tested. And so it's those kinds of pieces of transparency that both of you have fought for. And we wouldn't have those, the sort of background and to be able to not only know what to ask for, but to demand it from the state. So that's one thing that you'll see coming up. When we look at the next meeting coming up, I know Pine Dubois, who heads the handicap, was going to be in our last show. We had to reschedule. What do you see is coming from the next meeting? What do you think are the most important issues? Diane, do you want to start this one?
Well, I think that one of the most important issues is the recognition that it is illegal for Holtec to dump. And in fact, there's a law, the Massachusetts Oil and Hazardous Materials Act, that said even the threat of dumping is illegal. And so right now, Holtec needs to withdraw that plan and go back to the drawing board and figure an environmentally responsible way to manage this wastewater.
Mary?
I think there will be an outcry from the public attending the meeting on Monday that the meeting itself, the agenda, is biased in favor of Holtec.
How so?
Over 50% of the 2-hour time allocated for the meeting is given to a discussion and report by Holtec, and then the speaker chosen, I don't know who chose it, who's paying for it, is someone who is considered a shill for the industry. He learned a long time ago, put your mouth where the money is. And we have seen on YouTube speeches he's given, and he gives the false statements, not to worry, tritium is fine. They focus on tritium because tritium cannot be filtered and will be discharged if there is a discharge, and is especially dangerous to pregnant women and children.
And so one of the things about the sampling as we move forward, the reason the legislators wanted it witnessed was so that when we do get the results of the testing, we have some sort of confidence in the way it was collected. But Senator Markey's office has made very heavy demands in terms of testing for a wide variety of potential chemicals that would potentially affect public health, tourism, shellfish, our food, our health going forward. And the Attorney General's office has laid out its view that there are several steps that need to be accomplished before any potential dumping would be done. I've filed legislation that we hope will move forward, which would be about a 2-year process and actual analysis of not only the plan for which chemicals, but also how it's going to affect the health in our community. And I was able to move forward with the delegation on having the cost of much of this not just bared by the taxpayer. I mean, these are just very, very financially secure for-profit corporations, Holtec, and certainly shouldn't be the taxpayer's burden. What do you see are the most important things for advocacy to nail down between now and the deadline that Mary mentioned early on, that Holtec had sort of status quo for a year? Because I'm concerned we're coming up on that deadline.
Well, we need to take back the narrative. It's not Holtec's narrative, it's the people's, it's our commons that we're protecting. And Holtec must withdraw the plans. It is illegal to dump. The water is secondary. The primary issue is it's illegal, and Holtec has already made a statement that they will be violating the law because they're still planning to dump.
Are you saying in the hearing that Senator Markey brought to Plymouth, there was a terrific conversation with one of the CFOs,
Dr. Singh.
Dr. Singh, and I credit Senator Markey. Only the second time in history of his committee did he come out and do a field hearing, which was done and of course Congressman Keating was there, Senator Moran's folks were there, Attorney General's office. I think in part it's the advocacy that has lifted this issue into that kind of really moving forward, not finished, but moving forward with transparency. I think, read in the news the past week or two, there are other places that, the radioactive water is just getting dumped into the ocean.
Yeah, that's true. But they are not comparable to the situation in Massachusetts. Fortunately, the Attorney General's office was successful in getting a settlement agreement signed. And in that agreement, Section 2, Paragraph 10, subsection L, it says clearly that Holtec will abide by all federal and state laws pertaining to health and the environment. That is, obviously you're a lawyer, a legal contract.
It certainly is. Attorney Maura Healey's office, Attorney General Maura Healey, really did a terrific job in saving the taxpayers money on litigation, but also getting some huge concessions.
And that's the number one. That's the number one. So no longer is the Nuclear Regulatory Commission in charge on whether it is or is not okay to discharge. It is up to Holtec to follow our state laws that say 0 and the federal and state discharge permit that says 0. And fortunately, our Attorney General, Maura Healey, had spoken to a group on Cape Cod that was put in, reported in the newspaper that said, no, we will not allow the discharge, and we are prepared to prevent it. And so unlike New Jersey, where they did discharge, they didn't have that capability, nor did they have a updated discharge permit like we have here in Massachusetts that says no discharging spent fuel, pool water, or any water coming from the decommissioning processes. They didn't have it. We did. Again, advocacy from the public, advocacy from your office, the legislature, and so by the public getting active, we always say get active today instead of radioactive tomorrow, it puts it on the front plate of the important decision makers like yourself in the state so that it's given the attention that it deserves.
Well, I agree with you, of course. One of the other things that I appreciated is with respect to the NRC rules that are getting formulated, and the part of Senator Markey's hearing was specifically on that review, and there was another forum later that evening. There was a lot of disappointment that folks who thought the NRC was more of a watchdog and found out that really wasn't the case. No. Those rules are still being formulated, so I think that Plymouth and Holtec decommissioning have a role in perhaps doing sort of, I guess I would say, rather than corporate interests, prioritize public health interests, local tourism interests, the future of our economy. What are the partners, some of the partners that you have met along the way in your advocacy that you think are most important in this decommissioning?
By partners, do you mean the decision makers?
Well, you mentioned the legislators. I guess I was thinking of, I know the lobster folks have.
Right. And I think the herring pond tribe.
Yeah.
I think the lobstermen, the real estate, the realtors, absolutely. That they've been huge. And then a lot of the regular advocacy groups have been very supportive. But I just think it's powerful that the whole community has come together. Now, in our representative democracy, it's consent of the governed. And we're looking at our commons and trying to protect it. And every town along the whole bay, from Situate all the way down to Provincetown, have voted no dumping. It's
all
unanimous.
Of the select people, right? The
Right.
local municipal governments have sent letters.
Boards
Absolutely.
of health.
And then it was on the ballot on Cape Cod. It was on the ballot in every town. And it passed by like over 93% in every town. Maybe some people didn't read the question, but it's overwhelming that the people are saying protect our commons, no dumping. And again, we go back to the federal government. They still don't know what to do with this stuff that you have to isolate for tens of thousands of years. And you think you're going to dump it in our bay?
Exactly. Now,
Yeah.
what would be the preferred alternative? What solution-oriented conversation can we end with?
The practical solution is to ship it out of state to a licensed facility. That is what Vermont did. They shipped 2 million gallons, twice than what Holtec's talking about at Pilgrim, to a facility in Idaho. If you send it to a approved licensed facility, if something starts leaking, they're lined. If something starts leaking, then they can deal with it and put it someplace else, put it in barrels or do whatever. If you dump into the water, you can't get it out. End of story. It's there to do its damage to marine life and then work its way right up the food chain to your dinner table.
Right.
And so that is the reasonable solution. The other solutions talked about were to store it on site. We know that's not going to happen because Holtec's selling point to decommission get the contract at other reactors is we do it quickly. And towns like Plymouth want it done quickly so they can have taxable advantages out of that property.
So essentially redevelop it, use
Right,
it for
right.
something
Whatever
else,
they're
right?
going to do.
Right,
Right.
right.
The other option that they talk about is evaporating it. But what happens? First, you need a heat source, and they don't have enough heat. That would cost them money to evaporate. And when it evaporates, where does it go? It goes
In the
up
air,
into
I
the
would
air,
think.
across the bay to my property. And that is clearly not an acceptable alternative. So it's either dump it or ship it. And we say ship it to a licensed facility out of state, just as the state of Vermont did.
And what is the argument then? It seems fairly simple. What is the reason
Money.
that there's...
It's all money. You know, Holtec is using the Decommissioning Trust Fund, which is our ratepayer money, $1.2 billion they got when they bought Pilgrim for about $1,000. They got that big chunk of change. So they're going to try and scrape up as much of that into their pocket as they can. And so if they have to truck it or use whatever other method besides dumping, it's going to cost them money. It gives them the incentive to do a really cheap and dirty decommissioning job. And this is a pure sign that they will profess an illegal activity of dumping for money.
Well, and this came up at the hearing, right? Because they really were called on by especially Congressman Keating and Senator Markey that to use the fund for the benefit of the health and safety of the taxpayer.
Right.
And that the Attorney General's office, I mean, this is not an issue where we don't have means. We can,
Right.
the money is there to do it right.
Well, there's
Well,
that,
yeah.
but the important point to remember that Pilgrim Watch and the Attorney General brought forward in motions opposing the sale from Entergy to Holtec, that they're probably going to get $1 billion in profit.
Right.
$1 billion for a $1,000 investment.
Right, right.
Now that's
yeah.
being a little piggy.
Right, right,
They
right.
could do with a little less.
Right.
It's they estimated $20 million to ship.
Yeah.
That's
a drop in the bucket.
Drop
and
in
it's
the bucket.
and it's not it shouldn't be costing taxpayers any money. Holtec, the rate, as I said, the decommissioning trust fund is ratepayers' money. It's our money. We should have a say in how that's being spent.
Absolutely.
And yet,
and that's the subject of my legislation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is going to be an ongoing legislative watch coming up in the next session, as well as from now until the end of the year. You know, I think that we have to turn up the transparency heat and not be compliant, and that's really what both of you have advocated for the longest time. The legislators are all working cooperatively. It's a bicameral, bipartisan issue. This is the health of our neighbors, our family. What do you? I want to spend just a minute or two on the next generation, which you have fought long and hard to protect. We look at especially young women. What do you say to young folks about how important it is to get involved, to make change?
Well, first, that if you don't get involved, look what's going to happen. In the summertime, you like to bring your kids to the beach, to dig in the sand, to make sand castles, to swim in the water. If over 1 million gallons of radioactive contaminated waste is dumped and winds up on that beach, how are you going to feel about bringing your child?
Scared.
Yeah.
Right.
How are you going to feel when you go to the fish market to get fried clams, to have mussels, whatever you eat? Are you going to eat it? What about your teenage son who works for the local oyster growers as a summer job? What's he going to do because they aren't going to be a viable business by then. Then you decide you might sell your house. Who's going to buy it? Everything that you care about, your home, your community, your children, are at stake.
Well
and,
put.
and so therefore, get active today and not radioactive tomorrow.
I've heard you say that for years. It's so important in encapsulating. What are your thoughts, Diane?
Well, you know, who wants this dumped in the bay? No one. No one. It's predatory capitalism that's going to kill us. And when corporations have more power than the people, that's the big problem. And that's where individuals gather in communities and work together to keep this planet a safe and healthy place for our children and our children's children and future generations. We won't have this if we don't fight for it. And that's too bad, but that's what you have to do. It's a responsibility. And as Dr. Helen Caldecott says, if you love this planet, you got to step up.
And ages ago, I was involved in civil rights. And who would have thought? Going to a pray-in, sitting at a lunch counter, marching in a demonstration was going to make a difference. It did make a difference.
You know, I sometimes think that folks don't believe one person can make a difference. And the two of you have, you know, just not, before I was in the Senate, I remember coming up as a Deputy Speaker of the Assembly of Delegates on Cape, which is the Cape Cod government. And just really appreciating the fact that I was coming in after there was a lot of work already done. And your work has just been, you know, I think informative, of course, to legislators, but also in terms of the general public to really, people are busy, they've just started kids in school, and the fact that if you pay attention and get educated, your time does make a difference and you can make change. And you embody that. You are, you know, it's really legacy building in terms of showing young people, as young women in particular, we have a lot of women coming into the Senate now. And I just want to just really tell you how grateful I am. It's been very impressive to watch that sort of strength and your base of knowledge. So I want to thank you very much for all of your investment and your time.
And the same goes to
and
you.
Thank you
from
to you,
us.
yes, for your powerful statements and standing up for the community. And you are a model for the young women.
So kind of you to say.
Yes.
Well,
Thank you.
Thank you, my friends. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with me and working with me and many other advocates to ensure that sufficient oversight and public engagement are key factors in the decommissioning process. Our communities deserve a guarantee of greater transparency and an assurance that action will be taken on the state and federal level to prioritize safety and security. Those interested in learning more about the background of the Pilgrim Nuclear Plant can visit my website to see a full timeline of Holtec's proposal to dump 1 million gallons of wastewater in the overwhelming response from clean water advocates and others. As always, my office remains an open resource for anyone who may need assistance. We can be reached by phone at 617-722-1330 or by emailing me at susan.moran@masenate.gov. Thank you all for watching today. I'm Senator Moran. I'll be in your corner.